Thank you. I'm so glad you guys all came back after lunch. I went outside and it was so beautiful out that even me for a moment I thought, should I come back? Of course I did, but you guys did as well, so much appreciated, and I know you've all probably eaten recently, so there's a subtle food coma settling in. No food comas allowed at all, and I don't know if I'm trying to convince you or me, unfortunately. So what I'm going to be talking about today is the future of omnichannel immersion, and I'm curious as to how many of you are familiar with the term omnichannel. And how many of you feel pretty confident that you know what that means? Not so much. So basically what we're talking about here are cross-channel experiences, and so often you'll hear the term referring to cross-digital channels. So for example, a mobile site, a website, a kiosk, an Apple Watch, all of those things are considered channels. But for any of you that also work in a space that has bricks and mortar, maybe it's retail, maybe it's healthcare, banking, finance, all of those areas also oftentimes have channels that are actually bricks and sticks. And so when we're talking about omnichannel immersion, what we're talking about here is the collision, basically of all of those channels to create moments in time. And how do we design for that sort of immersive experience? So looking at the future, so often I hear a lot of talk today, some of it's hype and some of it's not, about the Internet of Things. And that's a term I'm certain that everyone is familiar with. And for the most part, everyone's position is the Internet of Things is the future, the future, the future. I don't think so. I actually see that as being a gateway to what is the future. And so what do I see as the future? It's information and engagement. Well, that's not new. We've had information and engagement for a long time. Well, what's new is actually this notion of deep implicit information creating these really contextually relevant immersive experiences. So this is the infusion of data into our physical world. And so with that said, we're at a really interesting moment in time that's really at the forefront of a design revolution. And there's a point where we have to spend some time to really curate this, because what we're seeing is that the advances in technology are actually outpacing our ability to craft experiences for them. That's almost like the opposite of what you would expect, right? That we'd have these experience ideas, and then we'd have the technology to support that. It's the other way around. So it's funny, one question I was asked is, what's one of the biggest challenges that retail faces? It's not just retail, it's anyone in omnichannel, it's Moore's Law. You know, technology is advancing quickly. And if we're not careful, then we get ourselves into a space where we induce a lot of risk. And it's not just risk to the user experience, but also really to the viability of businesses. That as we throw more things out there, if they don't meet user expectations, people aren't going to come back. But worse yet, there are actually some societal challenges that we can face if we don't curate things correctly. So at the end of the day, anybody who's in this room, who's involved in design, development, it's going to be on all of us to make sure that this is a future that's curated for the betterment of humanity. And I don't mean that lightly. So with that said, I'm going to start off by taking a look at some of the influential technology that we have coming through the lens of what's here today, and then what that actually means to our design practices. So before I jump into technology too far, show of hands, how many of you have used a 3D printer? Yeah, a good percentage of you guys. For those of you, how many of you have heard of them? Yeah, I kind of banked on that before I presented this, or pulled this presentation together. What about virtual reality? How many of you guys are familiar with it? How many of you have used it? How many of you are designing for it? Less. Beacons. How many of you are familiar with beacons? Some of you, not quite as many. How many of you are designing for them today? A few. A few. Clearly people who are working in an omnichannel domain. So these are the types of things I'm going to talk about today. It sounds like broadly you guys are familiar with these, so I'm going to assume a base level of understanding and just talk about where some of these things are going. So when it comes to 3D printing, right now it's primarily makers, it's engineers, it's designers, or people who are currently in school, supporting school projects and that sort of stuff. But you know, it's not something that's likely to go away. When it comes to 3D printing, a couple of interesting predictions that are out there. According to Allied Market Research, $8.6 billion market by 2020. That Gartner is suggesting we'll see mass market adoption, not just with enterprises, but with consumers as well, within less than 10 years. I'd argue that that is actually probably a little too far out. If I was a betting person, I'd say 5 to 7. And you already see retailers placing bets. Some of them are playing. The example you see up over here is really collaboration with Walmart. You'll see a little figurine there with a person's face that you could get printed out at a couple of locations. What you see in the middle, Amazon's 3D printing store. And then here's Thingiverse, Makeaverse, place where you can go to get a variety of different schematics. So what's going to change as we start to see more mass market adoption? We are going to see a shift in the burden of manufacturing. And that shift will go from buyer to seller. And what does that mean? That means you're going to see more retailers selling schematics and kits. This isn't just B2C, but also business to business. We're already seeing this start to happen in the parts industry, where you've had a part that's broken. Okay, let me send you the specs. You'll see the creation of more conductive materials, different filaments, and so the more we have here, especially copper, the more ability that we have to actually print connected devices at home. Has the chance of here shifting our ecosystem. So wearables, in the wake of Apple Watch, seems that wearables are all over the news today. Apple Watch is awesome. It's the first time we start to see some focus on aesthetics in the marketplace. If there was an example of something that failed on aesthetics, for sure, it was Google Glass. I had one, so I was momentarily a glass hole, which is awesome. Are there any other you in the audience who will confess to that? Yeah, just me, okay. Aesthetics matter, you know, especially if it's something you're going to wear on your face, to be sure. If it doesn't look good, if you don't feel good having it on, you're not going to wear it. We'll see adhesives. And in the future, embeddables as well. This is the kind of thing that makes the Gen Xers a little bit uncomfortable, this idea of embeddables, but I think it's actually not too far off in the future. And while today wearables are heavily focused on the quantified self, I don't see that trend fully changing. I think we'll see more happening in that space, especially in biotechnology and medicine as our tech improves here. Where things start to get interesting, however, is that the wearables today typically rely on some sort of external engine. They'll require a mobile device or some other device to tether to for its knowledge base. So basically, your wearable is more or less a sensor. Part of the reason for this is because they're not well powered by themselves. And so we're starting to see research out there around kinetics and solar power, especially when it comes to garments. And so when you can start to have self-powered wearables, you can now start to have internal engines, and your wearable becomes smart. It's interesting when you start thinking about the broader things that are happening within our environmental landscape that we'll talk about here in a moment. But I do have a video here that I wanted to share with you guys regarding Qt Circuit. And I know we've got Robert here from Intel, probably a couple of others, so you're welcome. Slight plug for Intel in here. But what I like about Qt Circuit is they've actually approached wearables from a different angle. So to date, a lot of folks are approaching it from really the technology angle. What can we measure, and then can we find an interesting use for that? Here we have fashion designers who didn't necessarily have an inherent career in technology so much as an interest in what's possible in terms of fashion first. So I'm going to play this for you guys.
To the garment to say, now you have to change and display this video, or now change and display this other color. When we start a project, usually we start like from a dream, and then we wake up and we say, oh, let's see if we can make that happen. So we just start designing the garments like a sort of a normal fashion design process. And then we create the technology to be perfectly, seamlessly integrated into the garment. One of the best ways to continuously innovate is to create the next technology, not just waiting for it to happen to be on the market and then use it, but just start your own process. Through the tablet, you can get your friends to interact with it. You can get these really strong emotional connections with your friends that are far away, but at the same time they can still be with you because they are on you, because they are on your garment. But you're still together because you're playing together. And I think this aspect of playfulness, I think, is very strong within our garments. That's really how the future should be.
So interesting, right? Totally different angle on wearables that we haven't seen much of before. And that was at New York Fashion Week. You know, it's been there the past couple of years, definitely featured as we see more of these sort of self-powered garments. It'll be interesting to see how it starts to impact things within our environment, which is a nice segue to micro-location. So with micro-location, what am I talking about here? I'm talking primarily about beacons. That's the thing you'll hear most about. It's little nodes within the store. Basically, you walk past them, you interact with them, and it can interact with you. So an example would be maybe you're walking through an environment, you've got your Apple Watch on, you walk over to a beacon, and then surprise, an offer shows up. Something along those lines. And today we do know that, at least when it comes to beacon, most retailers right now are currently actively playing in the space. They're all pretty vocal about that. But what's happening today, I don't believe, is the future of micro-location. What we're going to see here is a lot more in terms of connected homes, which is interesting. And there are a lot of insurance companies right now who are looking very heavily at this connected home scenario, and some even sponsoring startups in this space. Because not only do we have beacons hitting the marketplace, but at the same time, there are lighting companies. Philips generating lighting that actually has micro-location embedded in the light bulb. So you could imagine in your home if every single light bulb that you had also had micro-location on it. It's a small step between that and having a fully connected home, should you want to. But if we have fully connected homes, you're still looking at a bit of a system silo. So it's not a huge step to step from your connected home system silo to connecting that to other things. Maybe it's your grocery store, maybe it's your hospital, maybe it's your local school or the garbage company. We start to talk about connected cities. When it comes to technology, we're not really all that far from being able to do this today. It's just a matter of mass production of the things that are currently in really a beta phase. And all of this I see going well beyond digital marketing. And so let's talk for just a moment. Well, actually, let me first sell you on it. If you weren't sure, predictions are suggesting we'll see about 60 million shipments out by 2019. So this is not likely something that's going to go away anytime soon. Now segue into smart reactive environments. So think about yourself wearing a wearable, right? And think about being in an environment where everything around you is connected, right? All of your lights around you are all nodes, right? So you're part of your node in a mesh network. Literally walking around to the store, to your house, hopefully not into the ER, but maybe into the ER, you are a node in a mesh network that now the environment can interact with. And so as a result, we may see some pretty unique environmental engines out there. Things are going to start to flux around you. Things like the information that you see. That's not a small step, but what about environmental conditions? Might the lighting change? Might the temperature change? The people who are downstairs in the theater who are sweltering right now are probably wishing that the environmental conditions would change based on all of the nodes that are sitting downstairs in that space. Service model, how service is provided. If you know that all of the people that are in your store right now are over in men's, that might change how you're deploying your own resources over to men's, for example. And handling payments as well. You know, now there's a lot of talk around the Apple Pay. We've got the Apple Watch. Could it just be you and the swipe of a thumb? Maybe. You know, lots of opportunities there, but your environment can react to you in a different way, especially when we look at things like RFID in conjunction with all of this. So now virtual reality. I saw that almost everyone here was familiar with VR. Some of you have had a chance to play with it. Some of you guys have not. I will tell you, I have been excited about virtual reality since I was like this big, which I know isn't much smaller than I am now, but trust me, I was younger. And VR is awesome. And if we weren't sure if this was going to take off, look at the players that are investing. We've got Sony, Facebook, Samsung, Microsoft, Google, all placing big bets on VR. Yesterday, I read an article in Business Insider saying that they were predicting a $2.8 billion market for VR by 2020. Sony, what you're seeing over here is Project Morpheus. They had a more recent version of this released at GDC in 2015, or GDC 2015, just a couple months ago, that now some of the issues they had with motion and blurring had been resolved. It's really Samsung Gear VR that I'm most excited about. How many of you guys have had a chance to check out Gear VR? A couple of you guys. So what's awesome about Gear VR is Gear VR actually uses a Galaxy Note 4 as the display. So if you have a Galaxy Note 4 phone, it's a pretty small step to throwing that into your VR goggles and then being able to check out these landscapes, games, etc. The other example you see over here is the Oculus Crescent Bay prototype. That one has integrated audio and some other things. So today, most of the applications that we see are all related to gaming. You'll see a couple out there around film and documentaries, but heavy focus has been primarily gaming. That is not likely to continue in the future. Let me rephrase that. Yes, it is, I hope. But it'll be other things as well. So I see this going beyond audiovisual and into the notion of haptic and tactile responses, that you can see it, hear it, and feel it. That now, things that were once difficult to do when you're far apart from each other, you can do here, like social shopping or traveling, maybe with your sister who's states away. Interactive product views. So this one is definitely a little retail focused, but you think about all of the things today that you may shop for wherever. I won't bias. But large things that are hard to buy today, whether it's via an Amazon, a Kohl's, a Target, etc. Think about buying a house. Being able to walk through it before you actually get a chance to walk through it can be helpful. What about buying a car through VR? Totally different experience. Virtual collaboration. Do we have anyone from WebEx in here? Shoo. WebEx kind of not great sometimes. So this gets us around WebEx, the ability to actually meet with each other and see each other and talk and not have that weird phone awkwardness that happens sometimes. These last two are the two that I'm actually most excited about, and that is immersive interactive education. So think back to when you were, I don't know when it would have been, maybe 6th grade, 7th grade, when you learned about mitosis. So you learn about mitosis by seeing a picture in the book, reading about it, and if you're lucky, you got a chance to get in and look at a microscope, and maybe if you could tune it right, you could see what was happening there, and indeed, mitosis. But if you can actually dive in through VR into the cell and watch it all happen around you, the learning experience is so much more robust. When it comes to complex things like biochemistry, VR can be super helpful because even in chemistry, oftentimes form follows function. Function follows form. Function follows form. And so if you can see these things happen, you're more likely to retain the information. The last one, biomedical and surgical. Today, if a surgeon's going to operate you, they've got one shot and they'd better get it right. So when it comes to VR, and these are studies that are happening right now, imagine for a moment that someone you care about has carcinoma. They've got a tumor, and it's closely placed next to, let's say, a major artery, right? What you're looking at is a very dangerous operation. And so when the surgeon goes in to biopsy the tumor, they can go in not just for a biopsy, but they can also bring with them a camera. And that camera is going to capture that person's entire internal ecosystem right down to the location that's up for question in the operation. This is huge, right? Because now, thanks to VR, you can pull all of that footage back out and get a trial run. Because when you're operating on a person, everybody's environment inside is just a little bit different. You know, you don't want a one and done if you don't need to have one. So you can practice the surgery once, twice, however many times you can, so that when you're actually in the human, it's not your first time. Idea being that it increases the chances of survival. What an awesome use of VR, right? That's the type of evolution that's happening. So big data, how many of you are familiar with big data? Maybe we'll raise the other hand just so you don't have food coma. But yes, all of you roughly are familiar with big data. Big data is all the talk right now, but big data is difficult. It's a lot of information to pull together. I mean, there are many data scientists who are working to improve big data, but it relies very heavily on data mining today, and then also human reasoning. And so you see lots of companies hiring data scientists. You see retailers, you see insurance industries hiring data scientists to try to make sense of all of this explicit information that they're getting from their customers, all of the implicit information that we're getting from, you know, sensor data and other things. But at the end of the day, to make any sense of this at all, human reasoning is required. That it's the data scientists who are going in, creating the algorithms, and then mining the data back out. That information is coming to the designers that we can actually change experiences based on what it is that we're learning, but you know, it's only as good as our ability to spend time doing it. I don't see big data as being the future, although it's a stepping stone. Where things get really interesting is we start talking about this idea of intelligent data. And so when it comes to intelligent data, the difference between big data and intelligent data is that human reasoning isn't required any longer. Because what do we have in its place? Artificial intelligence and algorithmic sophistication. That the systems themselves can generate insights. I'm not going to say this is tomorrow. It's probably a ways out. But the type of advancements that we need to make to get to this point are actively happening. An example of this would be IBM's Watson. So when it comes to artificial intelligence, there are a couple of different schools of thought here. And the one that's taken off right now and that Watson is actually based off of is semantic models. And a semantic model is essentially an AI model built on predictions from probabilities, combinations, that sort of thing. If I were to contrast this to deep learning is where you're using the brain as something of a structural metaphor for the AI system. The latter is probably more powerful, but is also much farther out. The most powerful systems today are all built on essentially semantic models. So in addition to Watson, how many of you guys are familiar with Martine Rothblatt and Bina 46? Were the three of you raising your hands at South by? Yeah? She actually spoke at South by Southwest, and I will say it was one of the more compelling presentations I've heard. I don't have a video on Bina, but I do recommend that you leverage the power of Google and do a YouTube search for Martine Rothblatt and Bina 46. Basically, what she has done is created an AI robot of her wife. Yeah. And it takes in what she's called essentially the mind profile or the mind clone of her wife. So all of her wife's preferences, she's tried to populate it with memories and all of these details to try her very best to essentially simulate her wife. The types of things that she's looking at are things like immortality. People are exploring this, and smart people. I also had the pleasure of hearing Stephen Wolfram speak on the notion of immortality and took this even in a slightly different direction and said, okay, well, it's cool that we may have AI robots, but are they even necessary? Could they be just a file in a computer system? You know, if that file is a clone of you, is it still almost kind of like immortality? And if you have enough of them in a box, it's like an immortal city? Okay, that's interesting. It's the kind of stuff people are looking at right now, which is pretty interesting and also somewhat unsettling in the field of AI. And before I jump into this notion of design craftsmanship, we've got this idea of BMBI. And if there was ever a case for needing to curate experiences, I would argue it's this type of technology that's probably it. How many of you are familiar with brain-machine brain interfaces? A few, yeah. So the idea basically being that you could maybe port one thought to another person, perhaps through some sort of machine interface. At least that's the example that we have here. That's a pilot study that was actually done quite a while ago. So this is even new. This is from 2013 from the University of Washington. So you see, you've got a person's brain hooked up to an EEG, you've got the cloud, the internet, and another person on the other end who's going to be triggered to act against their will through a game.
Yes, success.
All right.
So we had a successful trigger. What happened on the other side of the intranet? Let's see. Did you see that? They're so excited. And it is exciting. And when I think about the applications of this to things like, you know, neuromuscular disorders, right? This could actually be used for good in a pretty powerful way. I'm going to flip that and say at the same time I can look at this same thing and I think zombie army, right? It's a little bit scary, right? What we have right now is a technology that's outpacing the use case creation and, you know, could go either way. It could be used for tremendous good, maybe not so much. I tend to be an optimist and I see all of these faces in the room who are ready to do hopefully good things. There's always at least one evil genius, but you see, this is the type of interaction that just screams for curation, right? We do not want zombie armies running around. And so with that said, all of these types of changes, especially when we get into the idea of smart reactive environments and virtual reality, it's new paradigms, it's new ways to shop. We're looking at ambient systems where there may not be an interface to the interaction. You may just show up. Okay, well, what does that actually mean for design, right? We spend a lot of time doing wireframes today. Do wireframes still make sense in that environment? What about design specifications? How many of you guys have to write detailed design specifications for the work you deliver? Quite a few of you, yeah. What do they look like when you have things like ambient systems or you've got interactions in a system that has interactions in a system? It gets complicated. And storytelling, I was happy to hear Donna earlier today talking about it because storytelling, does it become a primary mode of design expression in this environment? Maybe. And how do we want to handle all of this information coming in? Especially if you're at a company that's bringing in data scientists. If you're at a company that has data scientists and you're a designer or a developer, are you working with them? If you're not, I bet you will be. And other business partners. How many of you design for digital today? Or develop? Yeah. How many of you guys design for physical spaces? Couple. What about service design? A couple, right? So we start thinking about what does it mean to design for a total ecosystem inclusive of all of those things? It's probably building new relationships in our companies and also maybe bolstering our own tool sets just a bit. So we're at a point where we've got to really evolve our design practice. And so what are the top 5 things we'll want to consider when evolving our experience design practice? Well, first and foremost, you can anticipate ready adoption of digital fabrication for rapid prototyping. So for those of you who haven't used 3D printers, that sort of stuff, I would expect to see them in your design studios before too long. Or else partnerships with other maker spaces that can build these things for you. If you haven't had a chance to check this stuff out, highly recommend that you do. And that will see the experience design of complete ecosystems. That's not to say that we won't still need specialists, right? We'll still need a specialist in, perhaps even super specialists in like haptic feedback. I have a friend, Dave Birnbaum, who that's what he does, haptic feedback, right? He's a designer and that's what he does. So you will see specializations to help support some of these complete ecosystems. But again, inclusive of not just the digital, but the physical, the space environment, the services that sit around there. It's the people, the places, and the things. Very active consideration of service, ethics, safety, well-being, privacy, legality. We've talked about a lot of things today when it comes to service. Kind of interesting, but we can look to Disney as an example of a company who already does this today. How many of you guys have been to Disney? What about with kids? A couple of you guys. So if you go to Disney with a little one, and you were to walk up to one of the characters and ask the princess a question, "Princess, where is the restroom?" The princess will not respond to you, but will rather bend down to your son or daughter and say, "The restrooms are located just over here," right? Because they realize that that's a moment that matters a lot for your child, even if you were just looking for where the bathrooms are. A great example of an interaction pattern for service. We should see more of this happening as it goes beyond Disney and into hospitals, retail, etc. When it comes to ethics, right, big data certainly starts to tease at that question, or the idea of connected homes, right? If you're wearing wearables and your home's connected to you, are other people collecting your data? What's happening to that? You know, ethics and privacy are huge. Safety. How many of you guys have YouTubed Oculus roller coaster funny videos? Yeah, it's what you think. I didn't pull that down either, but afterwards I would recommend that you do this. Basically, you know, for any of you who have used VR, it looks pretty real, especially if you've got headphones on and people using it for the first time are standing up, they've put on their Oculus, they're riding the roller coaster, and they're trying to stand there, and it just doesn't work, and so they're falling all over the place and breaking stuff, and for the most part, the videos are primarily hilarious. However, with that said, there's a serious safety question there. Other things with VR in terms of safety, motion sickness. You know, we're seeing that all the time in a lot of the VR applications today. Something to watch. I'm a person who gets motion sickness, so I'm going to be careful about what I use for VR. So here, evolving the design practice approach, influence, and business partner relationships. If you work for a big company today who's looking to move into an omni-channel domain, and you're looking to partner to craft thoughtful experiences across the entire ecosystem, not just digital, but into bricks and mortar types of environments, odds are pretty good you're working with partners in the business you've never worked with before. They may not know you, you may not know who they are, you may see each other even as a bit of threats to position, but at the end of the day, building that partnership or relationship is going to make or break your success when designing for omni-channel experiences. And then also in terms of your level of influence, right? You're going to maybe have to have influence going beyond your digital domain. So all important things for your experience design practice. But I think this fifth one is definitely a last but not least, is really evaluate that technology yourself. If you haven't had a chance to try VR, go try it. There are a lot of places out there that are piloting this stuff now. If you haven't tried it, your friend may have one. You could buy one. They're a little expensive. I'd say hit up your gamer friends. Somebody's got to have some sort of device if they're gamers. Google has something now called Cardboard. Have any of you guys had a chance to use Cardboard? You've used it, a couple of you guys? Yeah. It's not nearly as awesome as it's not as awesome as Oculus or Gear VR, but I will say that for something that's cheap and it's cardboard, it's pretty good, right? Yeah, it's basically a low-fidelity prototype of a VR experience that makes it essentially accessible for anyone who might want to develop on it, or if you're running a design research practice, you know, might be a good choice of something to use. which makes for a great segue into design research. So, when it comes to design research, there are some significant evolutions that have to happen here as well. Today, we have a heavy push towards Agile. How many of you guys work in Agile environments today, or environments that are moving towards Agile? Yeah, so what we're finding is that now we're looking at a case where we're designing, deploying, designing, deploying, designing, deploying, and if you're lucky, you're designing and testing and deploying, and that test includes some sort of customer validation point so that you can kind of evolve and iterate whatever it is that you're producing. The thing that we tend to lose in Agile, and I've seen a lot of companies do this, is forgetting that the generative research matters too, so that you know what to start with. And so as we start to create more immersive experiences, especially as we see this proliferation of beacons and other things that lend themselves to smart reactive environments, is that we're going to need to better understand those unique customer journeys that sit around them. And that's going to require research. So identifying those moments that matter, evaluating triggers, and then again documenting those unique journeys. Evolving our usability testing practices to support novel interfaces and complete ecosystems. So, how many of you guys have testing practices today? Or work with a third party? So quite a few of you. So here is a case where a lot of times we're testing a website, we're testing a mobile site, but how do we test VR? It's a little bit different. What about testing an interface where there's no interface? It's an ambient system where you walk up and a thing happens, right? It's a different kind of test, different types of qualitative measures, different types of quantitative measures, but also some of these new tools could be useful in testing, like VR. 3, identifying data collection approaches for organizational learning, both explicit and implicit. When I asked the question earlier, how many of you guys work for companies dealing in big data? Some of you raised your hands, all of you are familiar with it, all of you work for companies, or even your freelancers, right, who you are actively collecting data, whether it's on your clients or your clients' clients. To figure out a way to actually organize that learning into something useful is going to matter whether or not you're looking at a big data scenario. But validating all of those findings through design research and testing is imperative, especially since we don't have intelligent data just yet. And finally, refining our approaches for data presentation, because many of our stakeholders and business partners don't speak data. And our business cases now become more critical because they're going to be rooted in some heavy data that's hard to grok. Odds are pretty good our intelligent data systems are going to be producing things that we hadn't conceived possible. In fact, Stephen Wolfram spoke about this and said, you know, it's going to be producing things that we don't actually have human constructs for yet. We don't necessarily even have language to describe, right? What do you do when your systems are smart enough now that they can outpace your own ability to understand these predictions, basically? Well, you test it, for sure. And so the design practice of the future will have a heavy investment in design research and insights. Right now, it seems like a lot of companies are moving away from that. I think we'll kind of pull it back in, that we need to understand all of this incoming data. And also to understand the journeys of all of the actors in the ecosystem, not just your customers, but your employees as well, because they're all an important part of that. That will have a focus on storytelling, storyboarding, rapid prototyping, and cyclical experience evaluation of complete systems. This is a little bit different than the Agile is happening today because you're almost cyclically evolving a moment in time, right? So you think about a buy online, pick up in store scenario. You've got this moment where the customer is walking in with their mobile device and they're walking up to the counter, right? Where is that counter? Is it at the front of the store? Is it in the back of the store? And how does that matter in terms of experience design? What did they have to walk through to get there, and did they know where to go? But then there's the mobile device, right? Well, do they even know how to find the information they need to pick up that item? Okay, so that's one consideration. Another one is the interaction that happens between the associate they're talking to, you know, and them, right? What's that conversation? And should that conversation be designed? Probably. And then there's the associate system on the other side, which when the associate system starts to break, the whole customer experience breaks down, right? Because they get confused and then they start complaining that the systems are slow and everything else, and that's true in most cases. But what are you evaluating there? It's all of it. It's all of it together that makes for this immersive moment. And so our practices have to evolve to support this. That we've also got these evolving patterns of interaction. Interaction design patterns are pretty fixed. They've been around for a long time. But what about interaction patterns around motion and haptic response? What about ambient systems, biometrics? What about relationships, conversations, interactions between service people and their employees? Or not their employees, but their customers, right? All of that stuff, there are patterns that should be established there still yet. That human factors in ergonomics becomes a strategic priority because you're talking about designing in space again. Not space like space, even though that's cool too, but physical space. And then solid experience design representation at the C-level. So last time I was at UX Strat, I remembered hearing everybody say, I don't know how to get a seat at the table, and when am I going to get a seat at the table? And the truth is that we're going to start seeing that as the table. That even if nothing else, for the big businesses that are here today scrambling to bring design thinking into their leadership level, you have businesses that are being formed today through what we'll call the lean startup movement, right? What is that? That's basically UX design applied to a business where it can learn a little bit more about the customer and then pivot the whole business and then pivot it again to be something that their customers want. That's a company that was founded really through UX design. And so with that in mind, the business of the future, you start to see design as a core business principle of the business. It's foundational to it. It's how it was born, right? And when these startups that were born of the lean startup movement become big companies, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with, because if they keep those practices with them, they're going to know a lot about their customers. And so you see a lot of big companies now scrambling to flip their paradigm to be customer first. That we will see all of these deep insights coming in, whether it's from intelligent data or advanced listening engines or a variety of different research counterpoints, that's going to start to inflect the actual business model itself, similar to what we're seeing in the lean startup model, but applied to big corporations. And that business culture and organizational design will evolve to support deep cross-functional relationships. Now, I know some of you can't believe it based on where you're working today, but at some point it's going to have to happen, because if companies do not evolve their ability to work together across disciplines, they probably will not survive this evolution. It's complete systems. And then, I mentioned earlier, employee systems become a focus again, focusing on the environments, evolving service models, because all of that stuff is as important as the digital. And at the end of the day, experience design practice drives business evolution. So we look today at some of the influential technology that's coming and the importance of design craftsmanship to curating all of that. At the end of the day, that comes down to experience evolution. The result of that is the creation of immersive omnichannel experiences. So with that said, thank you all so much for joining me today in this presentation. You see my information up here. @JolieSoucie is my Twitter handle. Feel free to follow. My email address is up there as well. It looks like it cuts off a little, but stephanie.sansoucie@gmail.com. I welcome any questions that you might have, and I don't know if right now, though, we have time for questions. Am I out of time? I have 2 minutes. I could probably answer like one question. Any questions? Got one? Oh, I think I just surprised them with that. Sorry. He's bringing a mic over.
So where old meets new, does paper stay as a surface in omni-channel design?
You know, I'm a sucker for paper. I'm also a sucker for old technology. I mean, I'm actually like a licensed ham radio operator, you know? I love technology, old and new. I was born of the BBS era. Paper, does it go away? I doubt it. I mean, will designers let go of paper, really? I don't know. Who sketches before you start to actually create anything in digital? Everybody, right? How many of you guys have tried shifting to tablet and it doesn't work because it sucks? Am I being filmed? Yeah, it kind of does, right? Paper, I doubt, goes away as a result, but hopefully we become less reliant on it. I think that's it. So I do have a panel just after this, so we may have some opportunity to ask questions, maybe more specific to retail, but all the same sort of questions come up in that space as well. So again, thank you so much, and until next time.